Life Audio.
Hello, and welcome to the Confessions of a Christian Alcoholic podcast. I am your host, John Seidel. This is your home for real stories, radical vulnerability, and remarkable comebacks. In the end, this podcast is a place for the desperate, the downtrodden, the destitute, and especially the drunk. But it's also a place of hope and healing. I know that firsthand because I'm the Christian who became an alcoholic, not the other way around. Today, I've found sobriety after decades of struggling. But more importantly than finding sobriety, I found Jesus. My prayer is that as I interview people just like you and just like me, along with professionals in the fields of trauma, faith, and addiction recovery, you will find the peace that is available to you through Christ on the other side of whatever you're going through and whatever addiction that might be. Because let's face it, we're all addicted to something. So welcome. Let's get radically vulnerable as we explore what it looks like to be on this journey of messy sanctification. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back to another Confessions of a Christian Alcoholic podcast episode. I am your host, John Seidel. Really honored to have you here. I've been getting some great emails from you, and it really means a lot. Thank you. You can go to christianalcoholic.com and you can fill out the form and send me a message. I try to respond to all of them. Some of you I've even set up some Zoom meetings with, because I just, not to be too spiritual, but one of the things that the Lord told me as I've been on this journey for the last 2 years is to try to be as available as possible. To never forget why I'm telling this story. And it's not for likes and shares. It's to help people. And, I was really hesitant to do that. First of all, if you listen to the first episode, I was okay telling close friends and family, and maybe there were some people I could help in the process, but I told the Lord hell no when he told me to write this story. And yet here I am. And now we have a podcast about it. So thank you. Thank you for reaching out, and whatever I can do to help you, I will try my best. We have a first in the life of the Confessions of a Christian Alcoholic podcast this week. And that is a repeat guest. Last week, we had Dr. Lisa Stanton on, and she shared her story, which was incredible. She was an atheist. She was the party girl. She was Lisa Pizza, as she said. And she told the story of driving drunk. She told the story of being picked up by the cops, so intoxicated. She told the story of interventions, and her story is, I think, a lot of your story, right? Even if it's not, it still is a great story, and go back and listen to it if you haven't already. But I knew that as soon as I had Lisa on, and the conversation went where it went, that there was no way I was going to be able to get to her actual book. And so she has written this book. If you're watching this through my Substack, The Veritas Daily, which if you want to subscribe, you can watch this. I'm holding up the book here. It's called 52 Life-Changing Lessons I Learned in Recovery, A Journey Towards Sobriety, Honesty, and Radical Forgiveness. Although, as Lisa told us on the podcast, if she had her way, it would be the things I wish I knew, I think is what she said. And so this episode, we're actually going to dive into the book. And again, if you're watching this, you can see that I have so many things doggy-eared and highlighted because it was just that good. So I wanted to invite Lisa back on for episode 2 to really go through her book. I mean, there's titles like Trust That the Message is from God. We're going to talk about that. The difference between belief and faith. The problem with church and recovery meetings. So we go there. We go to places that I think are really good and helpful. So without further ado, let's get back into another episode with Dr. Lisa Stanton. Lisa, thank you. You are our first repeat guest on Confessions of a Christian Alcoholic. Congratulations.
Thank you. It's a great honor.
And so we're running this episode is right after your previous one. I'm not going to pretend like we recorded them back to back, but I knew that as soon as we wrapped up the first one, we needed to have Lisa back because we didn't really even get much into her book, which is great. And so we paused a few weeks. I went through the book because I did get it. I mentioned last time that I didn't have it, but I have it now in my hand and had read through it. And I'm like, okay, perfect. Let's get you back. So we're going to run this episode you're listening to right now. Again, like I mentioned in the intro, if you're just listening to this one, go back, listen to the first one, listen to Lisa's story. It's awesome. And now we're going to talk about her book, 52 Life-Changing Lessons I Learned in Recovery, A Journey Towards Sobriety, Honesty, and Radical Forgiveness. But you had mentioned last time, what was the title that you had?
The Things I Wish I'd Known.
The Things I Wish I'd Known. And I think we both agreed, like, yeah, that's a great title.
Yeah. Okay. I'm learning.
Right, exactly. So I want to get right into it. What you have these 52 lessons. I think they're great. Maybe people want to read a lesson a week if they would like to. That works. But what are and each one is kind of bite sized. That's what I love about it. The only one that's really long is the first one, which is your story.
Yep.
Which is why I took a whole episode last time. But they're bite sized. They're interesting. They use story a lot, which I'm a big fan of story. Mm-hmm. Do you have any lesson or lessons that are your favorite?
You warned me that this question was coming, and still
I did.
So I think when I was thinking about it, I do think it's interesting. There's one that I read. So I didn't plan at my book launch. There's like 70 or 80 little eyes staring at me there. And I didn't plan what I was going to read. I just decided I would pray about it right before. And I feel like that the lesson I read, which I'll say what it is in a second, ended up having like a lot of impact in that room. And it was cool to see that in action. So I feel like that one has like a livingness to it that the other ones don't have because of that experience. And that was lesson 6, which is prayer can come before belief. And it's the one where I'm praying. Basically, I'm like finally willing to pray to what I called regular old God at the time, because I was trying to pray to the universe and all these other things before that. And I'm praying about my ex-boyfriend's mom who's dying, and I keep seeing 417 everywhere. And then eventually, I don't know whether to ruin it for people, but a cool thing happens. And I feel like that one just like there was an interesting mix of people at my book launch who like support me but don't believe in God, or are unsure about God, or are like Gen Z, more like universe people. Not that it always has to be a Gen Z, but like younger people. I guess I'm not even Gen Z, millennials who are trying to people of any age trying to do the universe. But I felt like that lesson kind of like you said, I never say like, there's not a lesson that says like praying to God will be more effective than the universe. But I like basically say like, for me, this is how it evolved. For me, this really cool thing happens when I made this change. And I feel like that story is a good like nudge for people who are in this space of like, do I really want to step into Christianity or do I not? And at that point in the book, I'm not even sure that you're stepping into that. I think it's Christianity, but just stepping into calling it God.
So that's lesson 6. I think what's interesting. I had lesson 5 as one dog-eared. So let's go right there.
Yeah.
And that is, you have this fun idea that I think is great that you implemented. That is, you weren't quite there with God yet, and so you went out and you got a Google Voice number, and you said, instead of praying, I'm going to call this number and I'm going to leave God voicemails.
Yes.
Talk about that.
So what had happened was, you have to also put me in the space of like, I'm angry, I'm defiant. And not that I'm never angry now, but most people when they meet me now, I don't have like an undertone of like, you must walk on eggshells around me because I'm angry. And like back then I really had an undertone of like, stay on your toes. This is an angry one that you got coming toward you. So like I had a mentor at the time who was like, stop calling me. Like, you have to start relying on God and not on me, or you're not going to make it in sobriety. And I was like, that doesn't even make any sense to me. Right.
Mm.
So, because I don't believe in God. So she is basically telling me to
At
rely
this time.
at this time. Yeah. And now I very much believe in God. But at the time in the story, I didn't believe in God. So it's essentially, this girl is telling me to talk to the air instead of to her, which is crazy to me. And I needed something more tangible than that. And so that's kind of what made me think, like, okay, I like calling this girl, so maybe I can try calling God, because then it's not just me talking to the air, which is how I felt prayer was at the time. And it works great, because if you go out and try it, if you do a Google phone number, then every time you want to talk to God, you have to call. It has to ring like 8 times before it even goes to voicemail, and you have the opportunity to leave a message, and you'll eventually just give up and try prayer.
And yet, I do think the idea, like when I first got into sobriety, and one of my big steps is abiding, and I talk about, like, it's not going to be perfect, it's going to feel weird, it's going to feel awkward, you just got to do it. Like, there is this period of time where you just have to do the thing, no matter what it feels like. And so I think for some people, like, maybe you are maybe you're listening to this and you're struggling with the idea of prayer. And what I would say is, try this. Yeah, try this. Get a free Google phone number.
Yeah.
Call God. Leave a message, right? You can even have them transcribed now, right?
I was going to say, it's fun and scary, because 5 years later, you can go listen to what you were doing on voicemail 5 years ago.
Right? But yet, I think it's great. I love that.
Yeah.
And so then I want to jump to lesson 8, because this kind of goes with lesson 6 that you talked about. But you talk about the difference between belief and faith. And I thought that was really, really good, especially as someone who went from, God is whatever you want them to be. And I say them intentionally, because you're like, I'm not using female, or I'm not using male pronouns, to having a faith. And so talk about that difference between belief and faith.
Yeah. I think it was a big lesson for me, because I feel like when you go from this whole, like, I was really struggling with belief in God first, right? So I'm struggling with, like, God's not real, whatever. And then I have this big sort of like surrender moment where I'm like, fine, I'm going to try it. Maybe God is real. Let me see what this is. But then it's like believing that God is real for me. So as a non-believer, I think I'm going to start to get the fruits of the Spirit by believing God is real. And I think that's where I got stuck, is like, the moment of conversion is great. And then I feel like some peace started to come and some other stuff, but then that's not the foundation of a relationship with God, is not believing that God exists. It's actually having this like interactional relationship, which I call faith. And I think that was the hard part, is to see that I'm not going to have like a sustained peace. I'm not going to have the strength to get through what's in front of me. Like that scripture just came to mind. That's like, God won't give you things that are more than you can handle with God. God will give you things that are more than you can handle on your own. But I wasn't like understanding that this was going to take faith and prayer every day and confessing my sins to God and all of this stuff that this interactional relationship is. I thought at first that just like by going from not believing he exists to believing he exists, that I like get to have the rewards of that, if that makes sense.
So good, right? I mean, even the demons believe and shudder, right? So it's like having a belief in God is great, awesome. Like that doesn't mean you're a follower of Jesus, right? That doesn't mean that you are one of his, if you will. And so I love that distinction between faith and belief. And I know personally in my own life, I mean, I would say I believed for sure. And yet I think then there's a final step. There's like belief, there's faith, and then I think there's relationship, like where you're really abiding with him and cultivating a relationship. And so it wasn't until I really finally started cultivating that relationship where then I was able to break free and get sober. And that, my friend, brings me to lesson number 7. Which will then jump to a different lesson. So lesson number 7, the problem with church and recovery meetings. And I think
almost the title is almost clickbait.
Right, right. But you deliver. You deliver.
Yeah.
I tell people it's only clickbait if you don't deliver,
True.
and you deliver. And so, what have you found is the problem with recovery meetings?
Yeah. So for those who have not opened the book yet, the one I think it's the very first sentence in that lesson is like, just to be clear, I go to church at once, if not multiple times a week. I go to recovery meetings once, if not multiple times a week. Like I'm doing these things multiple times a week. So also, how can I be saying that there's a problem with them? But the problem that I have experienced, and I always try to just talk from experience, not from this high horse of like, you should be doing this differently. But the experience that I've had is that when I'm just showing up to church or when I'm just showing up to a recovery meeting, I can have the experience that because my feet are moving, like I'm going to places, I'm doing the things, that I'm developing a closer relationship with God. And by just sitting in meetings, I'm not, regardless of the type of meeting, right? I'm not like favoring one type of meeting over the other, but by sitting in meetings, even meetings where people are talking about God, I'm not necessarily forming the foundation of a relationship with God that's actually going to keep me sober. And on the flip side, which is kind of interesting too, like with church, a lot of times when people relapse, they say like, "Oh, I stopped going to church, I stopped going to recovery meetings," and so we get this belief in our head that going to church, going to recovery meetings equals not relapsing. When in fact, what I've seen from my perspective is actually I stopped the relationship. I stopped praying. I stopped confessing. When I stopped doing those things, the only visible consequence, right, is I stopped going to meetings, I stopped going to church. But the problem isn't, those are symptoms of the problem. And then we diagnose the symptoms as the real problem.
So I say something similar in my book. So I agree with you on so many aspects, right? Is that I think part of my problem was I sat in church for a long time and stopped cultivating the relationship and had a head knowledge, but not a heart knowledge, right?
Yeah.
I also think, I believe in internal family systems therapy, and so parts work. And so I also think there are parts of me that were very healthy and were very spiritual and where the gospel was permeating. But I also think there are unhealed, wounded parts of me that had been hardened, right?
Yeah.
So I also think it's not, even I need to be careful with myself about, that dichotomy. So I talk about that. So I agree with you. And yet I wonder, don't you think, there's another side of me, though, that says, okay, I also know that sometimes I need to do things that I don't feel. I need to practice things that are not like that sometimes, like prayer, for example. Like there are days I get up and I'm not like, ooh, you know what I mean? Like I'm tired, I've slept in a little bit, but I also know like I'm still going to get up and do this practice. And today it might be a little bit more of like drudgery, for lack of a better term, but I also know that through the obedience and doing the action that it can bring that relationship. So how do you explain that difference?
You're saying like by going to the meeting, then it can bring the relationship, or by going to
Yeah,
church,
like sometimes you just got to do the thing that you're not feeling, or that you're just like, you know what? Yeah, today it's just showing up.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree. I think that's why I start the lesson by being like, I think I just say I do both, but like I was just traveling, but my weekly schedule is I end up at about 7 recovery meetings a week, and I'm in church 2 or 3 times a week, right? I'm there all the time. I just know that salvation isn't coming from the fact that I'm putting my feet there. But at the same time, like, if you look at the record, my feet are there very often, right? And I'm both getting and giving a lot in those spaces. I feel like sometimes the lesson comes from like the way that I write them might actually give some insight into where the lessons come from, which is I basically sit down on Thursdays and pray and say like, God, what do you want me to write about this week? And write an essay in about 45 minutes. And that is the lessons in front of you.
Lisa, I think people who read my Substack, they probably just got chills because I just got chills, because that is literally, if you go into my About section on my Substack, theveritasdaily.com, that's what I say. I just do it every morning, right? That's what he's called me to. And I literally say, God, what do you want me to write today? And I just write it. And so it's crazy to me. Like that's your weekly routine. I just had to call that out.
That's so funny. So God gave us the same word, but on a different schedule,
Yeah. Right.
which I love. But yeah, so whatever, I would say that week, someone, because these are actually ones that were like posted in various places at various times, like in real time. And then I just put them in a particular order for this book. So I bet in real time, someone in the world was struggling with that, who needed to hear that week, right? Because I think it can go both ways. Like you said, people who are avoiding places where God is and God's people are need to actually show up to those places more to hear it. And then there are also people who are overly dependent on those places and need to hear that just by showing up to those places,
Yes.
you're not going to find salvation.
Yes.
So both of those are true. So that I would say that word is for like the one set of people, or it's not like those are sets of people. I can be person A today and the other person 2 months from now.
Very good.
But for people who are more in that space of like, I'm showing up to all these things and I don't know why I'm not like feeling closer to God or fruits of the Spirit or feeling any more peace or getting through this any better or whatever it is.
And I think that brings us to the next lesson, which I'm going to jump ahead. It's lesson 14. And this was actually the first lesson I read. This was kind of a funny thing. Like we had our first podcast. I bought the book and it came and I literally was just doing the thing where like, I'm literally just thumbing through, like not just as a euphemism, but like I'm just, with my thumb and my finger lands on lesson 14. And lesson 14 is another day of sobriety is the wrong goal. And I will say, I think I emailed you. I posted as soon as I read this, and I'm like, oh my gosh, thank you. Mm-hmm. And so if you listen to this podcast, you'll know that this is a refrain. And I don't think like there are some people who think it's controversial. I think it's just truth. But explain lesson 14, another day of sobriety is the wrong goal. And maybe I'll even read a section from it because it's so good.
Do you want me to speak first? You read.
Yeah, speak first. You go.
I guess what that lesson, I mean, like I said, it's one of those things where it's like somebody can disagree, but I just tell my story in there, which is when I was focused on counting days of sobriety rather than, I don't know what I call it. I think I like the words that you used.
What did I use?
I was like, can I talk about the fact that I was reading your book or no?
Yes, yeah, go ahead. Yes, please.
I was like, oh no, is this like whatever? I was going to say, I can't remember what you call it, but I thought it was cool when I started reading the draft of your book. I was like, oh, this is like, it looks like we already had talked to each other or already had like read each other's stuff and we hadn't.
Right.
But I think you talked about like, maybe it was called abiding in like it's aiming toward a closer relationship with Jesus. And I say a very similar thing in not so many words is that like, when you aim toward that, and then let the sobriety part, the not drinking part, the not using drugs part take care of itself, I'm actually like growing spiritually. And like, I don't feel like I've said fruits of the Spirit. Like there should be some drinking game of water about how many times I said fruits of the Spirit during this podcast. But like, that's when I'm like getting those fruits is when I'm aiming toward Jesus. And I had a really horrible experience of aiming toward more days of sobriety, which I talk about a little bit in that, chapter, but it was just miserable, right?
What do you mean by that? Explain that a little bit.
Yeah, so when I was aiming toward like I just wanted to have more days, I think I said in there, but there's so many different means to get another day of sobriety that are not forming a closer relationship with God.
Yep.
I can sleep it off. I can go for a lot of walks. I can overexercise. I can fall deeply into my eating disorder, which is part of what happened with me. Like when I'm anorexic and bulimic enough, I don't need to drink as much, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I feel miserable. I'm full of pain. I'm nuts, but I am sober. And so that's what happened when I aim for another day of sobriety is that then it's like, I'm creative. I can come up with a lot of different ways to remain sober for a day and just be moving more and more toward misery, but have my day count be going up. Right. Versus when I'm aiming toward God, then the day count happens to be going up, but I'm actually like slowly getting some relief from some of that pain spiritually.
Yeah, and I think in my experience, and I'll talk from my experience, is that like when, I wrote this article, and I think I mentioned it before, but, how did I stop drinking? I finally stopped drinking by trying to stop drinking. It was like, there are times in my story that I've tried to stop drinking, and that I have for a little bit, a month. I think it was probably the longest, like where I completely stopped. But it never stuck. But it was when I shot for Jesus, I got sobriety thrown in. It's like shoot for the moon and you land among the, and if you miss, you land among the stars. It's like I shot for Jesus, and then I got sobriety thrown in. And so I want to read these two paragraphs. So bear with me, audience. But I think this is really good. It says, "For people like me, the real problem isn't that I needed more sober days. It's that I did not know how to live in peace with others and enjoy the big and small moments in life. I did not know how to cope with life on life's terms. So, when my main goal was to stay sober another day, I could use any means to do that. But most means of doing that do not address the root spiritual problem. Lack of sobriety was never the problem. The problem was lack of spiritual awakening. Living asleep was the problem. Therefore, sobriety should not be the goal. When sobriety is the goal, anything can be the means. When a spiritual awakening that puts me in a position of neutrality around alcohol and drugs is the goal, the way is narrow, but the fruits are the fruits of the Spirit. Not another day of avoiding my emotions that happens to count toward my sober day count. When the goal is a spiritual awakening, the means has to be seeking God. And when my goal became seeking God instead of staying sober, my whole life changed."
Amen.
I mean, that's like mic drop, Why do you think that's so hard, though? And I think, for some people, especially maybe that who are really adamant about, and this is just where I've seen it. You can send me nasty emails if you want, but especially who are so steeped in, say, that like 12-step culture is the only way to go. They really, I think they have a hard time with that. Why?
I feel like, so it's interesting, because I think there's like, I think there's honestly an illness in a lot of 12-step programs. Because I had a reaction immediately because I wanted to be defensive. I'm like, no, but they're great. And some of them are. But I think what actually happens, what's ironic about 12-step programs is I feel like a lot of them have gotten away from the actual 12 steps, which of course are a direct line to God. If you do the 12 steps, you surrender to God, you confess all your sins, you tell other people that you were wrong for committing those sins if you harmed them, and then you pray every day, right? Like that's literally what they are. They're only a path to God. And I feel like the problem is that as 12-step programs have gotten bigger and bigger, people have stopped actually doing the 12 steps, which kind of goes back to the like sitting in meetings thing. And then it feels like the goal is like another coin. The goal is this, the goal is that. But it was actually in, ironically, 12-step rooms where someone first presented this idea of like, if you are renouncing, you are giving it power. Like if your goal is to not drink, you're casting out one demon and you're not putting God in. You're inviting 7 more drinking demons back, or whatever that scripture is.
I use that. Did you get to that part in my book? I use that.
I wasn't hot. I know I was giving you credit if I had gotten there.
Wow.
But yeah, so I feel like that's the biggest thing is, but it's interesting, that dichotomy of like really good 12-step meetings are meetings where you sit and you hear stuff like that and you're like, oh, but like that's not a majority of meetings anymore. A majority of meetings are like, don't drink and go to meetings and you can stay sober, and like you can't. Ironically, actually, since I'm on this little like 12-step bent at the moment, there's a really good meeting that I once went to that has a Mythbuster section at the end of it. Minneapolis is also like the mecca of 12 steps, so I feel like I have like a little extra.
Right? Was it in Ohio? I know, I'm trying to remember.
It was in Ohio. Yeah. But then we had Betty Ford Hazelden. That was originally like a 12-step thing. So then we say like people have stayed from the mothership, and then everyone calls Hazelden the mothership. So I feel like that's part of why. But so there's a meeting that has a Mythbusters portion at the end of it. And it's interesting because if you go to 12-step meetings, it seems like people say like, don't drink today. Like your only job today is not to drink. And that Mythbusters thing at the end of the meeting, and it's all from like only 12-step literature. Like that's the only thing you're allowed to cite. The myth was don't drink. And it's like all over the literature. It says like, you have lost the choice in drink. You have lost the choice in drink. Your only solution is going to be spiritual.
Mm,
Actually, like, so I think the problem is 12 step is not 12 step anymore. It's just
mm.
don't drink.
That's a yeah, and I know other Christians who have done 12-step programs who have said they've you know when they've tried to even just explain that their higher power is God, they've been slapped down. But I say that with some trepidation, right? I am not against it.
Yeah.
If that's what you need to do, I think my experience has been kind of awkward, and I
Yeah.
think what you just said probably explains why.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate that. We'll be right back after this. Okay, let's go. I'm going to see the next one that I have doggy-eared, and that is... I chuckle because part of, when I talk about the steps that I took, one of them is obedience. And what that has looked like practically in my life is God will tell me to do things, and I'll be like, that's crazy. I shouldn't. What are you talking about? And he'll just like keep knocking. I'm like, okay, fine. I'll send that email. Fine. I'll call that person up. Fine. I'll take that person out to coffee. Whatever. I'll say this. And so lesson 10 is you have this crazy story that God told you to say something to someone.
Yep.
And you're like, this is weird.
Yeah.
And then you did it and something happened. So tell us that story.
Yeah. So
the lesson is trust the message that the message is from God.
Yeah. So I was at this retreat. Keep in mind, I'm probably like months new to belief in God at this point. Like, it's not like I have this like established relationship. Like we're still like getting our, I don't know, someone would have some saying for that. It was new. But so I'm at this retreat that someone had recommended. And there was this lady who I guess like most people who sign up for Christian retreats, right, are like going through something, which I didn't really think about. But this lady was going through something and she was just crying and crying all weekend. And it was almost like awkward to watch because she was like participating, but then would just start crying again. And it turned out that her husband had passed away and there was like a whole story. And I was just like, we were in this prayer thing one night and I was just like praying, not really like for her, but kind of like for her of just like, please comfort her. Like this is mostly because it was just like, I just felt so bad. Like she'd been crying for 3 days. And I was like, please comfort her, like whatever. And then all of a sudden I like see like blue kind of, I'm sitting there with my eyes closed praying and then like green and then a truck. And I was like, what the heck? And I felt God be like, you got to tell her. And I was like, tell who, what? And it like literally, I can't explain it. I don't like hear God as like a voice. I know some people do, but it was just like, somehow I like knew that I'm supposed to tell the crying lady like about what I just saw. And I was like, this is so weird. So I don't do it. And then not all of these details are in the book, but then we had to like march back to the thing through this whole thing where I had like a lot of opportunities to talk to her. And then we did like a whole nother activity where I had a lot of opportunities to talk to her. And then finally it's like 11 p.m. Everyone's like going to bed. They're tired. She's like walking out of the room. And I got one of those. It's sometimes when the Holy Spirit needs me to do something, it almost feels like I'm having a panic attack, but I can tell it's like not panic. It's just like, come on, like, what are you doing? And I was obsessively thinking about it by this point. So I go up to this lady and I'm like, hey, can I talk to you? And of course she's like, yeah, sure. Like she has no idea what's going on. And I was like, okay, I've never done this before, but I really think I'm supposed to tell you blue truck. And she was like, what? Like it's not like it like turned into a cool thing right off.
Right. It was like,
she was like, so you're supposed to tell me blue truck. And then I kind of explained, I'm like, I was praying in the thing and I saw like blue and then I saw this truck and I think I'm supposed to tell you. And she was like, can you tell me what kind of truck? And for some reason, I always like get made fun of in my family. My family knows about car brands and I'm like very bad at brands. And I was like,
kind of like my wife.
So I like thought that she was asking me like the brand of the car. I didn't realize that I had not even communicated pickup truck. So she was like just asking for like type of thing. And I was like, I don't really know what brand it was. And she was like, no, just like, what does it look like? And I was like, oh, a pickup truck. And she just like then kind of like burst into tears. And I was like, is this good? Is this bad? And then she like basically goes into this story about this turquoise blue truck. So of course then I interrupted right away and I was like, I saw green also. I didn't know that that was relevant. Um, so it's like a blue green, obviously,
Yeah.
pickup truck. And it was basically that right before she found out her husband was sick, they had like bought this turquoise pickup truck that he was gonna like fix up and do fishing stuff with their son. And I can't remember how long he had been passed for, I think like a year or so. Um, and she like went to bed that night, and the next morning, I mean, it's like sad to say that this is like the happy thing, but she like took her wedding ring off for the first time the next morning. Um,
Mm,
and it sounds like a sad, you know what I mean? It's like a sad
yeah.
and a
No,
happy
but
thing. But the next morning, she like took her wedding ring off and then came up to me and was like, "Thank you so much." And I was like, "I didn't do anything." Um, and then we had like a little reunion a couple months later, and then she came up and was like, "You have no idea the difference that that's made." Um, to just like have the peace that like he's with God.
mm, that's incredible. And so so something I want to say is, so I grew up in a very charismatic household. It was like people were prophesying about the Packer game, on a
Yeah.
Sunday, and like what parking spot they were going to get, right? And I'm not saying you were prophesying here. Like, I want to be careful with the terms that I use. But yet, I think for so long I shut myself off to the more Holy Spirit type things.
Mm,
I think since coming to the end of myself, I've been way more in tune with them. And dare I say that even part of my only being head knowledge and not heart knowledge is because I was so scared. I had swung the pendulum so far, right?
yeah.
Um, and so I've done this once since I've I would say have been abiding and kind of had this spiritual awakening, like you call it, where I went up to someone and said, God's telling me to tell you this. Like, but what I say, and this is what I want to be cautious about with people, and I think the way you did it is great. Is I always say is like, test it, right? Like I could be wrong. You know what I mean? Like this, like maybe this is a little too much tuna last night. I don't know,
Yeah.
but I feel like I need to sit right. And by the way, like my story of saying that like doesn't have this amazing miraculous ending, right? Like it was to a woman who had her and her husband in our church had gotten divorced, and it was the first time she showed up, and I felt like God was telling me to tell her that, like, you're not too far gone, and like he still loves you, and that there's always hope. And that was it. Did they like get back together? And like, no, not as of this recording. And I'm not saying that's even what he wanted to happen.
Yeah.
So here's my question. I've had people ask me this. I think it was it one of your, I think it was your post that I did this about, like, didn't you do a post about hearing God and like how you hear God? Maybe. Okay. Well, let me just ask you this. How do you hear God? How do you know that what you're hearing, and not audibly necessarily, is from God? Like personally.
I would say that I don't pretend to know 100% of the time if it is.
Mm.
And especially I would say if it's only like one time. I mean, I would say back to the blue truck thing. I had no idea what was going on. I did not grow up in a charismatic anything. I like that was like a one-off extremely weird experience that has not been repeated in my life since then.
Yeah.
But I feel like it's so weird to explain to someone else because I want to be like, there's just kind of a knowing that I have, and it's definitely developed over time. But I would say, especially if I like, I don't know. I was going to say one-offs. I feel like there is kind of like there's a knowing. There's a couple other stories in there of, especially during like majorly traumatic times, there's a knowing that I have more easily that like, that's God.
Mm.
I feel like but the thing I would say is I don't think that God ever on like a regular basis is giving me like, I mean, even with that, he wasn't like, tell this woman this and then she will feel better, right? Like you never get like an outcome. Like even when we were
Mm.
talking right before this about this job that I've been applying for and how I like went into this consignment store that I don't even usually go into and then like saw this very clear sign that like from this company that I'd been applying to, I didn't in that moment feel like God was saying, and now you're going to get this job and that's going to be your future. I
Yeah.
felt God saying, this is in my hands. Stop being so anxious about this.
Mm.
And so I feel like a lot of times the communication, like people sometimes can go into this more magical thinking of thinking like, God's going to tell me if this is the right job for me. God's going to tell me if this is what it's supposed to be. And I feel like it's more like God's kind of, usually when I'm hearing him, it's just a reassurance of like, hey, I got this. Like even that thing with the 417 thing, it wasn't part of that lesson isn't like I prayed for someone who had cancer and they got healed. It's I prayed for someone who has cancer and God gave me a sign that he's got this even though she died.
Yeah. I think that is a great distinction. I'm so glad you said that. And I think that's been true. Like as I think back in my life and I think about talking about steps of obedience is I don't pretend that like he said, take this step of obedience and then this will happen.
Mm-hmm.
Email this person, talk to this person. And then it was just do it. Right. And okay. And in that process, there's faith and trust that is built. So I think that's a really good distinction. I want to move on. Lesson number 34. I think, self-love is not what I thought it was. I think one of the most destructive phrases, and you don't quite say this phrase, but I think is like one of the most destructive phrases, like you are enough. And I think it's become popular. And I'm like, no, I'm not enough. Right? Like if I were enough, like I wouldn't need God. Right? And I know like some people mean it a little differently. So I'm not also trying to be like the phrase police here. Sure. But yet I do think a lot of people kind of use it as a, hey, it's okay. Just whatever you have is enough. And it's like, maybe if you're like, okay, I can't do it on my own, and so I'm just going to bring whatever I can to God. But I think a lot of people mean it in a more like pull yourself up from your bootstraps type way. Mm-hmm. And so you talk about this idea of self-love and self-care and kind of all that is really popular. But you say self-love is not what I thought it was, and you put the focus on something else. Explain that.
Yeah. The self-focus for me is what was killing me. And I didn't realize that it was self-focused that what was killing me. And I say that in this way of like, you can love yourself to death. Like to be in self-love is to think so hard about yourself, regardless of what those thoughts are. Right. So like being completely self-absorbed, whether that's like pride or whether that's self-pity, is still this like self-love. It's just thinking about myself all the time. How do I feel? What do I need? Whatever, instead of letting the self take care of itself while I form a relationship with God and others. And I sort of refer to that state as self-forgetting, that I have never found peace by swinging to like the high side of self-love, if that makes sense. So if you imagine this like pendulum of like, there's prideful self-love and there's pitying self-love, but neither of those, there's no solution in either of those. There's no peace in either of those. It's this process of self-forgetting that I feel like is where I finally found peace, when it's just like, I'm not so obsessed with Lisa. And by not being so obsessed with Lisa, I also become less obsessed with what John thinks of Lisa. And through that place of self-forgetting, and the hard part is it's like, okay, yeah, I want to self-forget. What do I do now? But the only way to self-forget is through God, because we are inherently selfish people who are going to keep falling back into thoughts about self when I'm not unified with God.
I think it was C.S. Lewis that said, humility is not thinking less of yourself, but it's thinking of yourself less. Mm-hmm. So it's not this like, I'm going to flog myself and heap shame on myself and, oh, look, that's humility. No. Yeah. But like you said, it's thinking of yourself less, mm-hmm. and putting God in his rightful place. Yeah.
I'm going to say this phrase and I'm not even going to take credit for it. I'm going to throw it out there. You can even delete it out of the podcast if you want. But it just came to mind. And in those ways of like, if it came to mind right now, maybe it's supposed to be God's sharing it with the world, but you can delete it. But one of the most, an older person in a 12-step meeting while we're talking about them, one of the good ones though, threw this out one day and it hit me and I got so mad, which is a sign that like something good is happening. You know what I mean? The thing. But this person in the midst of a share about self-forgetting rather than self-love said suicide is the orgasm of self-love.
I need to think
The
about that.
release of self-absorption. It's the release of the pain of self-love.
Wow.
It's a tough one.
Yeah, I got to think about that. Like I just got to like sit with that for a little bit.
Yeah.
Like, that's heavy.
Mm-hmm.
That is heavy.
It took a long time. Like that's why I was like, you can delete it out of here if you want to.
I won't delete it. No.
It took a long time to go home and even be like, okay, what is an orgasm to whatever? But obviously it was said in a way that was supposed to like produce this reaction. But when it did, I was like, oh, like, yeah, when I'm in this like deep, deep despair, I have never thought more about myself than when I'm in the fetal position in despair.
And to get out of that, to let it go, right? Sometimes the extreme measure there.
Right. So like the buildup of that despair is released. Because that's what, I mean, anytime where I've ever thought about not being on earth anymore, it's always this like huge buildup of just like happiness and despair.
Wow. Yeah, I'm gonna keep.
I purposely did not put that in the book.
Keep with that one. No, it's good. So I think then from there, there was two lessons that I initially bristled at. Not bristled, right? Like not like I'm like, but initially it was lesson 40, where you say expressing my emotions to others isn't healing. And I'm like, no, I'm all about radical vulnerability, right? What are you talking about? And then I read it, you know, and that's always important, by the way. And so explain the difference between expression and confession, because that's really what that lesson is about.
Yeah. That lesson, to be fair, where I think it was on Instagram originally, and it's in some form that was a little less polished than this form. But a lot of people had that reaction, and it created a lot of good discussion, not just between me and people, but between people and people in the comments. But I feel like the biggest thing is that we're told so often to like not keep our emotions in and blah, blah, blah. And we should not. And this doesn't mean you should never vent, but it's to not confuse the venting with getting all the way down to like, I was wrong. Because it's mostly we're talking about expressing negative emotions, right? I'm not talking about expressing joy, because there's no confession there. And I don't know if you need to, there's no healing like that's like in a moment of needing to express joy, I'm not usually looking for healing anyway.
Right.
So we're talking about negative emotions. And it's like, if I take, you know, resentment towards something, it's like, am I just venting that I'm so annoyed that John did this and blah, 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 whatever? Or am I saying like, I was wrong for holding this grudge against John. And those two things are really different from each other on a spiritual level. And what's really interesting is like when I first got to recovery and everyone's like, you need to tell your story and you need to tell all this stuff. I was like, I mean, I was on boats drunk on Lake Minnetonka, keeping no secrets. Like I wasn't one of those people that had a bunch of secrets locked in. What I had locked in was I didn't think I was wrong for any of those things. And I feel like that was the big kind of like pivot point, is like, I'll sit on a boat out there, and back in those days, everyone was cheating on everyone. I'll talk about the people I've cheated on. Right. But that's a really different thing than getting to this place of like, oh my gosh, I'm wrong for the dishonesty and the disloyalty and that.
And I think that's where it comes down to the heart posture, right? And I think a lot of this, like even there was another one, we don't have time to get to it, but you talked about, I quote Johann Hari in my book, and he talks about the opposite of addiction is connection. And you were talking about like how that hasn't been true for you. And I think where it can be true for me and not true for you is, again, the heart posture, right? Like it's not simply about just being with people, right? Yeah. It's being, what I would say is it's being vulnerable with people and then getting to the heart posture, right? So that's how I think both those things can be true, where it cannot work for you, but if you have the right heart posture, then it can. Yeah.
Wait, really
I,
quick. I'll be
yeah,
really quick. What I'll say about that one is that I think, again, think of that one the same way as the church and recovery meetings. Now
yeah,
that you know the writing process, as there was someone that week who thought that bowling with their buddies sober was getting them closer to God. And that's who
yes.
that one's for.
See, this is why I'm glad we do this. It's great. And this is, but it is also is good. Like hopefully, when you post this on your Instagram, that people will be like, even if you've read the book, hey, here's kind of like even a bigger peek into my mind while writing it. So,
Yeah.
Lisa, man, this is great. We could go for days talking about all of these, but I don't want to, because I want people to get the book. And so if they want to get the book and they want to learn more about you and follow along, where again can they go?
Yep. DrLisaStanton.com is the best place to find everything. And then Dr. Lisa Stanton on Instagram and Substack. It's still my name. And then the publication is called Things on My Heart. So,
Lisa, thank you so much. Again, the distinguished honor of being the first repeat guest on Confessions of a Christian Alcoholic. I'll send you a plaque and a trophy and a headband later. But we really appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sean.
Isn't that truck story crazy? I mean, like I said in the interview, I would 3 years ago have just like kind of rolled my eyes at that. And I think I'm at a position in my life where I've seen God move, where abiding with him has changed my perspective on spiritual warfare, on just his presence in our life. And by no means have I swung the pendulum too far the other way, but I think it's a good reminder to me that so many times we want to limit God, and some of us want to limit God by saying he can't do spiritual things, and others want to limit God by saying, well, he can only move in miraculous ways, right? And I talk about this in my mental health journey, that I take medication for my mental health, and it's a common grace, and it can be really prideful. And I think there are a lot of people who tell God, you can heal me and help me in any way but medication for my mental health, and I just don't think that's right. So my point is just that I've become so much more open to and reminded of the ways that God moves in our lives. And it can be when he tells you to go tell someone about a blue truck. It's awesome. Hope you enjoyed that episode. Lisa is great. Go pick up her book, 52 Life-Changing Lessons I Learned in Recovery, or The Things I Wish I'd Knew. If you are enjoying this, please go ahead and like the podcast, rate it. If you write a review, that would be really helpful on Apple or Spotify, especially. I want to thank my partner, my audio partner, Life Audio, who took a chance on this, and hopefully it's paid off for them. I think so far we've gotten some great responses. And so go to lifeaudio.com to check out some other great podcasts. We will be back again next week for another episode of Confessions of a Christian Alcoholic. Love you all.